We will have time for questions at the end, and you can also place questions in the chat box as we're going, and we'll be happy to work on answering those as we can throughout the presentation. As Crystal said, we will post this recording on YouTube, and I posted the link to the library's YouTube up there. We also have a handout that we'll be using throughout the presentation, or that will have links to everything you want for the presentation. So I'll add that is the YouTube link, but I'll add a link to that right away. So I'll go ahead and introduce myself. So my name is Joanna Namath, and I am the Instruction and Reference Librarian here at Athabasca University Library. I'm also currently in the acting role of Manager of Library and Information Services. But in my role as Instruction and Reference Librarian, I do things like this, but I also can help you with your research questions as you're working through the process. So I will let Robin and Sarah Jean introduce themselves.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Robin Stobbs. I'm the Research Data Management Librarian at AU. And so like Joanna, I can also help you out when you have questions, but I typically give support when you're working specifically with finding data. And we'll talk a little more about that towards the end of this presentation.
And I'm Sarah Jean Watt, the RightSite Coordinator. And a writing coach as well, and I'll let you know more about those services at the end of the presentation. I also just wanted to let you know that you can turn on live captions if you wish. You go to the More button with the 3 dots, go down to Language and Speech, and then turn on live captions. You can also mute the chat notifications if you want, again under More, and then Settings and Mute Notifications.
Okay, so to get warmed up, we're going to do a little activity. So I'm just adding this link to the chat box. And basically, I'm just asking you how you organize your research right now, what you're doing to organize your research as you are right now, because usually you're doing more than you think. Can you see that? Okay, so once you go into the link I sent, you can just press add and then write maybe you make reference lists. You can also like other people's or comment on them if they're saying something you already have listed. So I'll give you a minute to think about how you currently are organizing your research, whether that's using Excel or using a particular program, or if you're not doing anything, that's totally fine also, but you're probably doing a little bit if you've managed to get into a master's. Okay, save PDFs in a folder. Say reference lists in Zotero. Awesome, using Zotero. But organizing folders, we'll talk about that during this presentation. A lot of Zotero users, that's awesome. Tagging and sorting notes. Robin's going to talk more about that, I think. And OneNote notebooks and pages. Awesome, that gives us a really good idea of where you're at so far. And we'll continue on. Okay, so thanks everyone for contributing, and I'll just give you a little rundown of what we're going to do this session. So we're going to start by looking at time management and talking about assignment calculators. Then we'll get into search journals and different ways you can journal your search using Word or Excel, as well as search history and search alerts, which are always really useful. Then we'll get into organizing your research, so folder organization, file naming conventions, stuff like that. Then we'll talk about note-taking, research planning, mind mapping within research planning, and then we'll give you some more ideas about where you can go for more help. So Sarah Jean's going to start us off with time management.
Thanks, Joanna. I wanted to share some tools and strategies for planning your time during research and writing. So first, I'll focus on shorter projects like in coursework, maybe term papers, that sort of thing. And then I'll focus on longer projects like your thesis or your dissertation. Next slide, please. So an assignment calculator is a tool that gives you a plan or a schedule of the research and writing process, broken down into steps. And each step has its own due date. So all you have to do is enter your start date and end date. And the start date, I'll just mention, that's the day you actually want to start working on your assignment. And the end date is when you want everything complete. Now, that doesn't need to be the actual due date. You might want to give yourself a bit of extra time there, especially if you want to submit your draft to the right site for some coaching. And in that case, leave 3 business days to receive feedback from your coach. Next slide, please. So now we'll talk about some assignment calculators that have different features. And the links to these are on our handout. So the first one, an assignment calculator from Simon Fraser University, will break down the steps for you into recommended percentages of time. It identifies the day you should begin each step and end each step. So for example, it might recommend 20% of the time that you've put in for research, 10% for outlining, 20% for drafting, and so on. And this version also allows you to import the first day of each step to your Outlook calendar. The instructions for this are on the handout that Joanna just put in the chat. So be sure to interpret each calendar event that it enters as the day you begin the step. You might want to manually change the event to recur each day until the next step begins. And I would also suggest scheduling in some break days. The second one you see here, the University of Toronto calculator, is useful because it allows you to choose between several different types of assignments. These include literature review, annotated bibliography, presentation, and even grad school application. Similar to the first one, you'll receive recommended steps, but different types of assignments have slightly different steps. So this assignment calculator not only gives you a recommended timeline, it also gives a guideline for how to approach that type of assignment. And with this U of T calculator, you can generate a PDF that provides the steps and the dates. I found it more useful to manually put the dates into my Outlook calendar, but either way, these tools can be a starting place for planning when starting an assignment, and they can definitely help keep you on track with the steps of the writing process. You can also find a link to our writing process webpage on the handout, and that page lists these and many other tools for every step of the writing process. We also have a series of writing process webinars that you should check out from the handout on our webinar schedule. Next slide, please. Now, if you're very visual or tactile, you may also want to print a blank monthly calendar and write down which step of your assignment you should be working on each day. Excel has a template for this, so you don't have to go searching the internet. You can just open Excel and print the template off there. This one is called Blank Monthly Calendar, and the handout has instructions for how to find it. You can also print your calendar from Outlook just with a specified date range and 1 month per page. And we've also given you instructions for that. Next slide, please. Okay, now even if you're doing a much longer project, there's an assignment calculator for that, like these ones, specifically for the graduate thesis and dissertation. The University of BC's thesis calculator allows you to choose a master's or PhD option to get tailored results. And the steps are broken down by semester this time. Detailed steps are given not only for writing, but also suggested professional development and self-care. This time you can sign up for email reminders, which could be useful if you're more apt to check your email than your calendar. But a downside is that it is geared toward UBC students, and many links or suggested steps are relevant only to them. But you might be able to find similar resources at AU, and if you're not sure, then please email us at the right site, and we'll do our best to help you track down what you need. At the graduate level, you may also want to try the University of Minnesota's dissertation calculator. It gives very detailed strategies for each step. Steps include developing research methodology, reviewing the literature, analyzing data, and writing. Like the SFU calculator that we discussed at the beginning, each step is broken down by percentage time to spend, accompanied by a due date for each step. Next slide, please. Now, I'd also suggest creating a blank calendar in Outlook devoted completely to this one longer project. This is a good idea to help keep you focused on the various steps of one project at a time. The assignment calculator will suggest the time periods for each step. Then you can put them into Outlook, signed in with your AU email address. And here you can see I created a calendar with different steps from the University of Minnesota's dissertation calculator. I color-coded each step so that when I printed it, I can quickly see where one ends and another begins. So for example, it shows in yellow when I would need to begin the literature review starting in April. And our handout has instructions for how to create and print a yearly calendar that looks like this one. You can print a hard copy or you could print it to PDF for a digital copy. Next slide, please. For more detail of what to do each day, you might still choose to use a calendar devoted to this one particular project, but you can overlap it with your regular calendar, as you can see here. This makes any entry onto the graduate writing calendar the different color, gray, than entries onto the regular calendar, which are green. But you can see them both at the same time. Next slide, please. So here's a quick challenge to sum up our discussion of time management. Please put your answer in the chat. What is the benefit of using an assignment calculator? Is it A, breaking the writing process into steps? B, giving you a schedule to input in your calendar? C, managing your time while writing? Or D, all of the above? See a couple D's trickling in. Yeah, that's right. It's all of these benefits. So I hope you'll try these out and find them useful. Now I'll turn it over to Joanna to talk about journaling your search.
Awesome. Thanks so much. All right. So as you search, it's very helpful to keep a document or a search journal of the terms you've used and how you found the results, and notable articles and citations that you want to revisit. So I'll go over using a Word document as well as using an Excel template that we've created. And these are just a couple ideas of ways you can go about organizing your search journals. So let's start with a Word document. Obviously, Word is very easy. You can use any word processor for this, of course, but you already know how to use it. You can just throw everything in there. It can be fairly easy. So what we started with here are using the topic of our search, so information about what research we're doing, and then the database we searched. In this case, we just searched the main search box on the library homepage, and the date, some of the searches we tried, as well as some of the result numbers, and some of the relevant citations. You'll notice that we just used computer-generated citations, so there's definitely going to be some errors in those, but we at least have all the information so we can get back to the article a little later if we want to go back to it. You'll also notice that I added the abstract for the second article, mostly because Scholars in Solitude isn't a super relevant title. So another thing you could do is add notes on how you think this would be relevant to your paper, or be like, there's 3 paragraphs that have to do with this one part I'm interested in. Something like that can be a good way to go about that, but that's why there's an abstract in the second article and not in the first. So looking closer, I identify where, when, and what I searched and what's missing. And then, as I said, we can correctly format our citations a little bit later on. So I've highlighted that as a note to make sure to do at the end. I usually do that when my brain's super tired and I'm ready to not think about my paper anymore. So you'll do lots of searching, journal your searches, read abstracts and full articles, and make search notes on individual resources, and then make a short list of selected resources for your current assignment. So as we said, there are many ways to consider journaling. This journal has been created using Excel, and you can copy this template into any Numbers, Google Sheets, wherever you like. So I'll just send you a link to that. And the researcher here, you can see this is a filled in one. First identified the research topic of hand hygiene in hospital workers. and separated out their main concepts. So we've got hand hygiene, hospital staff, and then education, teaching, promotion, and then maybe we're going to try and focus on Canada. So some various synonyms for each of the concepts. And then we get into some of the search strategies they tried and which limiters they used. In this case, we don't have a database listed, but that's another thing you can add in. I'll show you a little bit later on. So as you can see, we're considering ways to connect our searches. So we're using Boolean operators, ors between our related terms, and ands between our different terms. And down here, we've got our databases listed. So you can see we're using CINAHL for the first two searches, but we tried Search 1 and Search 2. Then we tried ProQuest Nursing and Allied Health, as well as PubMed, all with Search 1. We listed the number of results and then also information about the results to be like, this wasn't helpful, this one was really good, this one needs to be focused more. So now we'll talk a little bit about search history and alerts. So various databases allow for you to find your search history, and some allow for you to have alerts set so you can get alerted when a new article on the topic you're looking for comes up, which is really useful if you're working on a long research project like a thesis or dissertation. So in EBSCO, this would account for most EBSCO databases. I think all EBSCO databases. In this case, we're just using the main library homepage, but you can see under the search boxes, we've got search history. That will show you a list of the searches that you've done. So we've got, this is 4 to 9 searches here. You've got the different terms you used, the specific limiters, as well as the number of results. And you can also go back to that search, which is always nice if you realize you made a mistake and wish you could go back to search 5. Some databases also allow you to set up alerts, as I was saying. So if something new comes out, you can have that emailed to you. So over here under share on your results page, this is EBSCO again. You can select email alert and have any email sent to you about canine assisted therapy. All right. I think I missed one part. Yes, we can also do that. So that was in EBSCO. You can also do that in Google Scholar. So as you can see, you can select create alert and have that emailed to yourself. And I will let Robin take off talking about organizing your research.
Awesome. Thanks, Joanna. Do you mind if I swap to sharing screen here just because some of my slides have, what do you call it, animations, so they won't show up from this view?
Yeah, that would be awesome. Then I can work on dealing with my issues. So.
Cool. I'll do that then. Is it showing up all right for everyone?
Looks good to me.
Excellent. Okay, so thanks so much, Joanna. And now we're going to move into talking a little more about organizing as it relates to citation management software. And then Joanna will again speak to folders and file naming. So I'm just going to throw a link in the chat, which is also in the handout about citation management in case you would like some more in-depth information. So briefly, citation management software allows you to save and organize literature as you are searching. It can also be used to help you cite as you write and generate bibliographies. We have entire recorded webinars available in the library guide I just put in the chat. So I'm going to focus here on citation management as it relates to keeping you organized. If you have any questions about using the tools or want to learn more about how it can help you cite as you write or generate bibliographies, please don't hesitate to reach out to the library. Okay, so here's an article I found doing a search for research data management. In the top right of my browser, I can click on my Zotero add-on to save the article, and then a window comes up letting me know where in Zotero it's saving to. In this case, it's a folder I've titled Researcher Perspectives. That article is then saved in my Zotero library, as you can see here. It has saved a record of the item on this Information tab, as well as a PDF and a snapshot of the website where I saved it from, which in this case is Science Direct. Now you can use the Notes tab to add notes to the item. So for example, this might be notes on where you got it from, or if you're using a search journal like Joanna just went over, you could add a note with a link to your search journal or where you've saved that search journal. I'll also note that if you're using items like print books, you can manually add records into your Zotero library so you don't lose track of them either. I can also organize items I've saved. On screen here is an example of articles and chapters sorted by the course they were collected for with subfolders and assignments. So you see Human Ecology 565, Assignment 2, and the Final Assignment folder. I can also tag resources that I've saved. So that's in the bottom of a Zotero window where this red box is here. And that makes them easier to find because you can search on the tags, or you can click on any tag and only items in the current folder you're in that have been assigned that tag will be displayed. So if I was to click one of my tags, additional papers that don't have that tag assigned would disappear from this window until I take the tag back off. I like to keep a running list of tags I have created and what types of items they are assigned to. The example on screen is an Excel sheet where I'm tracking my tags from the beginning of a project on research data management. So as I read more articles, I will add to the list. So I've just given the tag name where I've created a larger category of RDM, and then more specifically, I'm categorizing things as case examples, and then explained what I'm using that tag for, just so I can be a little more consistent about assigning my tags. Additionally, when you're using citation management software like Zotero, items in your library don't only have to be in one folder. So pictured on screen here is an article on curation of qualitative research, but it's also about developing curriculum for teaching curation. I placed the article in two different folders, data curation and educational materials. Now this doesn't create extra copies of the item, it only exists in my Zotero library once, but it can be added to as many folders and subfolders as I like by dragging and dropping. So this allows me to organize papers by course or assignment, as well as by topic, without having to save duplicate copies into different folders. If you don't want to use citation management software, you can create a naming system for folders on your computer. You should be consistent in how you name folders and files within them and document those naming conventions. This can be as simple as creating a plain text README file to include in the top level folder that explains how you named them and how you organize them. If you want to include items in more than one folder, you can create a shortcut on Windows, or what's called an alias on your Mac. Links to instructions are included in the handout, and Joanna is going to talk to us about naming conventions for these folders and documents.
Awesome. Thanks, Robin. Are you good to keep sharing, or do you want me to take over?
I can share if you just say slide when you want it.
Okay, sure. Yeah, it's too hard to keep track of without having someone tell you. All right, so it's good to think about what files you keep on your computer and how you organize them in your head. So what do you have to organize? Personal, kids, education, work, taxes, medical. Next slide. I like to organize mine by semester and then course within the semester. So it really depends what files you need to organize and what organization system is going to make the most sense for you. Next slide. Folder naming is important, but if your files don't have helpful names within those folders, it's going to be even harder to find what you're looking for. So in regards to file names, we want to use descriptive names So author's name, a word maybe that describes what it's about or why it's relevant. Use consistent date formats like year, month, day, or just the year, whatever is going to make the most sense for the research you're doing. Avoid unusual characters such as slashes, ampersands, dollar signs, you know. You can also do not use spaces to separate terms, use underscores or differentiate words with capitals instead. And keep names as short as possible. Avoid repetition and be consistent. Next slide. So here are some examples of ineffective file names. I'm sure we've all had issues with various file names in the past. So if we can do a quick activity, how would you rename these? You can make up as much as you want to give more information to what these articles might be about. So you can write some answers in the chat box as to how you might rename them. And then we'll give you some ideas of what we thought of as well. Name, date, title. Okay, Sarah Jean's got the underscores, noting the course it's for, which paper and which draft. That always works well. The Johnson one's a bit confusing because we've got the PDF, 2 PDFs as well as notes. Which ones are the notes for? And then we also just have a nursing theory article. If you're in a nursing theory class, you're probably going to have quite a few nursing theory articles, so not super relevant. So you can go to the next slide, Robin. So here's an idea of what we can do to make these a little bit better. In this case, we decided that the 101 paper would be about Atwood. So we've got 2 different versions of our English 101 Atwood paper. I like that Sarah Jean added that it's paper 1, because probably if we're in English 101, we probably have 3 papers to do for that course. Then for our Johnson stuff, we added more information about the year and maybe what the articles are about. So we've got education theory as well as education practice, and that the notes are for education theory. And for the last nursing theory article, we decided to add in author, year, and that it's a nursing theory article. So just an idea of some better ways you could go about organizing your documents. And now Sarah Jean will discuss note-taking.
Thanks, Joanna. So the effective note-taking strategies I'll discuss include, next slide, please, anticipation, reading actively, using templates to take your notes and engage with the material, and knowing how and when to quote, paraphrase, or summarize. Next slide, please. So when preparing to take your notes, it's important to read actively for understanding. So reading actively means that first, you continually think critically about what you're reading. Reflect on what you've read. Think about questions that you have about your source. Second, use strategies to determine the source's main findings. When working with journal articles, for example, start by reading the abstract to determine if the article might be useful. Determine the article's conclusions from the abstract before you read the article to help you understand it as you read. Next, scan the article, reading the headings to determine relevance and to preview the article's main points. At the same time, you can scan for keywords that relate to your topic. And when reading books, use the table of contents, the headings, and the index to help you find relevant material. In any text, the introduction, conclusion, or discussion can be useful portions to read and reread to help gain understanding. Fourth, take periodic breaks from reading and summarize in your own words what you've read, just to be sure you understand it. Try not to just read straight through. It's really ideal to think about it as you go. And once you're done reading, you could spend a few minutes explaining the main points to an online study buddy, a spouse, friend, or colleague. And this will force you to put the ideas in your own words and ensure your understanding. That will prepare you for taking notes. And finally, part of active reading is engaging physically with the text in some way. So you might start out by highlighting, underlining, and circling to identify main points and keywords or phrases. Write your questions, thoughts, and observations in the margins. If your brain is doing word association with outside concepts or related words jumping into your head, you could note those down in the margins. If there's a visual way you can present some of the information to help yourself summarize it, you might want to try that. So for example, put a flow chart of related ideas on a page that you could then attach to the article. You could also make a diagram of a particular concept that you want to remember, or even create a doodle that represents some important information. And by doing this, you're interacting with the source physically, which helps you with comprehension and engagement. Next slide, please. Now, even if you don't print the article, you can still engage physically with the text by using a PDF reader. You can highlight and you can comment. For example, the citation management system that you saw earlier, Zotero, can allow you to do this. So here I use Zotero to highlight different types of information I was searching for in different colors. And I think they actually have more colors now than you can see here. I used blue for key terms, yellow for points on my research topic, and purple for super important points on my research topic. I also added a comment questioning the point in yellow so that I would remember to clarify it when taking my notes later. The comments and the highlights can be viewed in Zotero on the sidebar to the left of where the article appears, like you see here. Next slide, please. Now, there are some benefits to using a different PDF editor than Zotero, or, you could use it alongside Zotero as well. Here I use the browser Microsoft Edge. It's another great free option that allows you to highlight in several colors as well as draw and add typed text. So if you like those features, then you may want to try this. Those two features are useful for showing relationships between points, which you can see with my arrows. And it's also useful for adding further emphasis, which you can see with my attempt at a blue star at the bottom there. You can also add text wherever you want it on the page, as I did in blue. The edits that you make in a PDF editor will also appear in Zotero as long as they're reading from the same file. From your Zotero library, you would right-click on the article and choose Show File to see the file in its folder outside of Zotero. And then to open the PDF file in Edge, you would again right-click on it, and you'd need to choose Open With, and then choose Edge. Edge should open with the annotation tools in a bar at the top of the screen, like you can see here. And be sure to save it so that you can keep your annotations, and then later you would see those in Zotero. Robin also taught me that you can change the default PDF editor used by Zotero under the Edit section and then Preferences and General. You'll see a setting there that says Open PDFs using ... and then you can choose the editor, whether it's Edge or Adobe. So if you have a preferred editor, you can change the setting in Zotero, and the instructions for that are on our handout that was emailed to you. Next slide, please. Here's an example of a mind map or relationship map from Heart. You can do this through any approach that works for you for a single article, but you might find it even more useful for exploring the ideas you glean from multiple articles. This can help guide your idea or thesis development. And we'll see another way to deal with information from multiple sources at once a little later on. But I did want to show you that when working with an article to understand its contents, you don't have to treat the information in a linear fashion. Playing with it in a visual fashion can help you engage with it and thus understand it more comprehensively. And Joanna will also show you some ideas for mind mapping later. Next slide, please. So it's recommended to keep a working bibliography of items you read during your research. Now, a bibliography is different from a references or works cited page because it includes works used during research, but not directly referenced in your writing. So it's really important to have both a bibliography and a references page. The bibliography should include all items you've consulted, even if they don't seem directly relevant to your argument. You may have read them for background information, an additional perspective, or wider scope. And it's possible that the source could come in handy later, so it's good to keep the bibliographic information in case you want to refer back. And if you use a citation management system like Zotero, it does most of the work for you. You might want to add additional details of where you found the source, like the call number of a book, for example, and the library that you got it from. Maybe the name of a friend you borrowed the book from. Perhaps the website that housed a certain report in case you need to find it again. I can attest to the importance of this because on my last paper, I ended up not being able to find the website or URL to include in my reference entry for a report I had downloaded. I never did find where I found the report online again, even though I had a PDF copy of it. I was certain I would be able to find it, but I couldn't. So record that information when you find the source. And most importantly, therefore, be sure to record the complete citation of each source you use for your writing. Like Joanna showed, it doesn't have to be formatted yet, but make sure you have all the items that you'll need for your reference later. Don't fall into the trap of thinking that references are done at the end of a project just because the references page comes at the end of the document. You should be recording that information all the way along your research process. When I begin a paper, I like to create the title page and the references page, and every time I cite a source, I add the complete reference. You can copy it directly from Zotero, which you can see in figure 1 here. And if you're not using Zotero, you could try a tool like MyBib to help you create your references smoothly in any style. And we've linked to MyBib on our handout. Next slide, please. Now we'll look at some templates you can use to help guide your note-taking as you research. These can be accessed through links on our handout as well, and Robin has provided our first template.
Thanks, Sarah Jean. So this template is geared towards an in-depth reading of an item. I'm going to explain what I use each section for. You don't necessarily have to use all of the sections. You want to think about what's most relevant for you and what type of project you're working on. And an empty copy of this template is linked in the handout. So to start off with, I have this little table at the top where I have tags and first read. First read is where I put the date when I've read the paper, and I may update that as I go. For tags, that matches the tags in my citation management system. I like to assign my own, but you can also look at the keywords assigned to an article. They're usually listed underneath the abstract. For quick description, that's usually 1 to 2 sentences of what the article is about. And then key takeaways are 1 to 2 key points for me and what I'm working on. I fill this in at the end after I've read the article or chapter. And while the quick description describes the article itself, this section gets more into why I think I want to use it for a particular project or why I think it's an important work. The key terms section are terms that are defined in the article, which can be helpful when if you're reading a lot of theory papers to track how each author is defining a particular concept. For important points, these are the author's key points. I tend to summarize as I read and then pull the most important pieces into this section. For method, if it's a research article, I note how the research was designed, whether it was an experiment, a survey, interview, etc. And then for other of interest, I put other points, critiques, or interesting connections I make as I read, and some of these then might get moved up into the key takeaways or into the follow-up section when I finish reading. My 4AU section is one you'll definitely want to change for yourself. This is a template for my current project, which needs to relate what I'm reading back to AU's context. You might want to have a section for your own particular assignment or project. I sometimes summarize this section into a couple of key takeaways. That way, the things that are most relevant, like a quick description of what the paper was about and why I want to use it, are at the top of my notes when I refer back to them. And then lastly, my follow-up section is where I record any references the author made that I want to be able to look up later. So if they've cited someone that I think is relevant, I might make a note here to remind myself to follow up on that. And I'll turn it back over to Sarah Jean.
Thanks, Robin. Next slide, please. You read my mind. Okay. So here's another template to give you an idea of how to gather evidence, data, or quotes that you want to discuss in your paper. And I just want to thank one of our students who suggested that I change the format of the template and use Excel. So that's what I've done here and on the link on the handout. So to begin, you would place your citation in the first row and then summarize the main idea next to it. The main points identified in the next row will usually consist of summarizing, while you can go into more detail in the supporting details row with paraphrases and direct quotes. Supporting details might include evidence, findings, data, sentences of analysis or discussion, and memorable wording or definitions. You should also include a comment section for your own thoughts and questions. And I would recommend further differentiating the types of notes with a key that identifies different fonts used. So for example, you could use italics to identify paraphrases, quotation marks, of course, to identify quotes, and bold for your own comments. Maybe you'd want to use different colored fonts as well. Next slide, please. This comparison template, adapted from HEART, is designed for multiple sources at once, which is particularly useful for literature reviews and in-depth research papers. It allows you to group sources by topic and explore their similarities and differences. And this in turn gives you a way to structure your paper or literature review by subtopic or theme. So you choose a subtopic or theme and place it in the key concept row. Each column would be used for a different article, identified by the author and date listed in the top row. You can change the category names in that first column as it suits your own research, just like Robin mentioned with the 4AU category. This is just to give you a starting place. And then you can fill out each column for the source listed at the top. This way you can understand how different sources compare in their findings on this subtopic or theme. And again, I'll mention here the feedback we had from a student on the usefulness of using Excel to build your own template. Next slide, please. So to keep your notes organized and effective, it's important to know when to quote versus when to paraphrase. Your writing should be made up mostly of paraphrases because it is your writing. It should be mostly your words. But there are certain times when quoting, which is using someone else's exact words, can be useful in a research paper. So use quotes where the wording is very memorable or important in some way. The author's words are maybe unique and unusual and get their point across concisely. Quoting might be useful when you're defining a term because the wording can't easily be changed without altering the meaning. It's also pertinent to quote when you want to respond to or critique someone else's exact words. And that's common when doing a close reading of a novel or other literature or engaging in a critical debate in your field. But overall, try to minimize the use of quotes in a research paper. And when you do quote, choose the part of the quote that's most relevant. It could even be just a word or two, maybe a short phrase. And that short quote could be embedded within a sentence in which your voice is prominent, maybe paraphrasing the rest of the idea or analyzing the short phrase. And I just want to note that a quote or any piece of evidence never speaks for itself. It's up to you to explain the quote in the context of your paper. So as a writer, you've chosen that quote for a reason. And while note-taking, if you record that reason, the reason it's important to your paper, that way later you can remember how you wanted to use the quote when you start outlining or drafting. And when you do quote, ensure that you record the page number as well, and always put your quotes in those double quotation marks to signal that they're the exact words of the source's author. Next slide, please. It's also important to take the time to paraphrase and summarize effectively when taking notes. This will help to capture a clear and complete understanding so that you remember when you return to your notes later. The main difference between a paraphrase and summary is that a paraphrase is of a specific wording or passage, maybe a sentence or two, up to a short paragraph, while a summary is to identify and record the main idea or thesis, or the main points that support the thesis of a source. So when you paraphrase, you might use a signal phrase referring to a specific statement, like Baldwin states. When you summarize, you might use a more general signal phrase that captures the main idea, like Baldwin argues. Like quoting, you'll actually only paraphrase when you want to record the meaning of a specific portion or passage of the source. So it'd be a specific statement, and again, perhaps signaling with a phrase like Baldwin states. When you're working with several sources, much of the work you do to collect your notes will be summarizing. That's a lot of what we've been talking about so far. So it's essential to record the main idea or argument of each source you read so that you document the context of your other notes. Main points, which are pieces of support for the argument, are also important to allow you to follow the logic of the author's argument or findings later. And you can also summarize specific passages by stating the idea of the passage in fewer words. Paraphrases come in with specific details, like pieces of evidence, findings, data, and the author's analysis or discussion. So just like with a quote, always record the page number of a paraphrase so that you can find it later. The same can be said for summary if you're summarizing a particular portion of the text. Next slide, please. Paraphrasing and summarizing vastly improve the flow of your writing when you begin to piece your evidence together into paragraphs. It can be very awkward to just put quote after quote with very few of your own words. So don't allow your note-taking to be just copy and pastes of quotes, I should say. Paraphrasing and summarizing allow you to transition smoothly without the choppiness of overquoting. My most crucial suggestion for paraphrasing and summarizing effectively is step number 3 here. Do so without looking at the original source. This will help you avoid using the exact wording of the original author. After actively reading, you should synthesize the idea or passage in your own mind before recording it. Think about it. Be sure you understand it. Once you understand it, put that original away and write a draft of your paraphrase in your own words according to your own understanding. Then you can check your paraphrase against the original source to ensure that it's sufficiently different from the original. Ensure that the wording and the sentence structure are both different. If you've used a lot of the same wording, then revise those areas to complete your own wording. Remember that the most effective way to gather evidence will summarize the main ideas and main points, paraphrase the most important details, and perhaps sprinkle in a few memorable quotes. Next slide, please. All right, so to review, here are some true and false questions. You can put your answer in the chat, T and F, or true and false. So the first one is, engaging physically with a source is an example of active reading. Is that true or false, T or F? Looks like Saeed and Tess are saying it's true. Good, yeah, I agree. That's exactly right. Engaging physically with a source is an example of active reading. And how about this one? Note-taking templates can help you record key details and compare sources. Is that true or false? T or F? Getting some more T's coming in. Good, you're right. Yeah, that's exactly the use of a note-taking template. And how about this one? You might choose to quote if the wording is unique and concise. True or false? Oh, Saeed's right on it again. T, and Jennifer T. Awesome, you're right. And finally, you should draft your paraphrase with the original source in front of you. Is that true or false? Oh, good. I'm seeing some false, maybe a couple of T's sprinkled in. Yes, so remember to draft your paraphrase without the original source in front of you to avoid borrowing words from the original. All right, we're running out of time, so thanks for participating in that. I'll turn it back over to Joanna.
Okay, so I'm just quickly going to talk about research planning, and then we'll get into our conclusion. So if we can go to the next slide, Robin. So to formulate a research plan, the first thing you want to do is pose your topic as a question. As you read, think about your stance on your topic or the angle at which you would like to examine it. And you also need to think about resources you'd like to use, like books, journals, theses, dissertations, whatever is required for the assignment, but also you might want to think about using community voices, newspaper articles, policy documents, other gray lit, and where you can find these. Then you can plan out your research journal. Next slide. So doing some pre-reading before you start digging into your in-depth research can really help you get a handle on what you'll be looking for. A lot of students come to me with either like the printed out research question that was assigned to them, and they're like, can you help me find 5 articles on this or 20 articles on this? And I have to be like, okay, we can't just write an article on women in ancient Greece. We have to decide how we're going to focus that. Maybe feminism, work, day-to-day life, motherhood, relationships, religion, maybe a particular region within Greece. Next slide. So one thing you can do is create a mind map. So in the center, you can start with a main idea and then jump ahead to all of the brainstorming related ideas that come up with that. So let's jump to slide 60. So for example, one more. The central research topic here is what impact does screen time have on cognitive function? And you can see we've separated it into older, younger people. We're just doing brainstorming. And then maybe screen time, more information about that, and then cognitive processes. And next slide. From that, you can decide to focus on young people, cognitive processes in video games, perhaps. So you can get a little bit more focused as you're going. For this, I used Mindomo, but there are a lot of mind maps you can use that are free. So Mindomo is the one I used, as I see there's a question in the chat. I think I have 2 listed on the handout as well. All right, and we can go ahead into our conclusions. So next slide. And the next slide. So I was just going to ask what you will take away from this session. So I have another Padlet for you to fill in. Just anything you're going to try now that we've gone through this, whether it's trying using a mind mapping tool or one of the other great things we've talked about so far. And we can maybe I'll share my screen and see if anyone adds in anything there. If that's okay, I'll take over, Robin. Okay. And then I can just run through my conclusion while everyone's adding in their terms, and then I can jump it ahead for you guys. Okay, so we've got better file naming systems, trying different mind mapping, trying different managers. Awesome. Organizing notes using Edge or Zotero, that's always a really good one. Using templates or note-taking. My current style is chaos. Yeah, that happens. It's really easy for that to happen, especially if it becomes your current system. Assignment calculator, awesome. All right. So I guess, Robin, do you want to share the slides again for the last little bit?
Sure, I can do that.
Okay, sorry. Just for our conclusion, reading actively, great. We're getting lots of good responses here. Thanks so much, guys. Okay, so 64. So our reminders are to remember that organizational styles are personal, choose your approach, and be consistent, and write throughout, and back everything up. Next slide. And now we'll give you a little bit more info on where you can go for help during the research process. So AU Library offers webinars like this one, tutorials and guides. We also have a pretty good FAQ section. We also offer assistance with search strategies and where to search and access to materials, of course. And we can also help you with technical difficulties surrounding using the library or other databases. And Robin will talk to you about research data management.
Yes, okay. So if you're working on a project that requires you to collect data, for example, you're interviewing participants, working with archival materials, designing an experiment, or if you're using secondary data like sourcing statistics and data sets from other researchers or Statistics Canada, we can help with that. If you have data you want to share with others, that's another example. So the library offers support and resources for all of that management and sharing of data. You can book individual appointments for assistance or review the resources we have put together and have linked in your handout. Please don't hesitate to reach out with questions. There will be a webinar focused on RDM next week on October 4th at 1 p.m. if you want to come out to that one as well. And I'll throw a couple of RDM links in the chat here too, but they'll also be in your handout.
Okay, and just a few words about the Right site. We have lots of different ways you can get support. We can give you written feedback on your assignment through our writing Dropbox. We can meet with you for a real-time appointment. Every Thursday at 12:30, we have our writing forum, which is just kind of a drop-in session that you can come to and talk about writing, ask questions about writing. So it's pretty fun for building community with other students and with the coaches. And of course, we also have other webinars. You can find many of the library and Right site webinars at the link that I'll put in the chat. Oh, and almost forgot, we also have a brief survey to gather your feedback and learn what else you'd like to see from us. So please check that out in the chat as well.
And as we've already discussed, we've created a handout for you that Crystal has emailed out that will have links to everything we're talking about, but feel free to contact us if you are not finding something or just have any questions about what we've talked about today, and our contact info is at the bottom of the page. And next slide, and then that's just a thanks, and we have time. Well, we don't actually technically have time for questions, but feel free to ask questions and we'll answer them, and I'll stop the recording.